Okay, we're back again here, and we're talking again about religious experience. And we just got done talking about William James, and he was arguing for the weak justification for inferring objective reality from subjective experience. So, in other words, like we said before, to what extent are the visions and the messages that we receive from these spiritual folks, to what extent might they correspond to some sort of absolute higher spiritual reality? Are these the messengers chosen to show us the way, or are these people all crazy? And James is arguing that, okay, these folks, as the weak justification, he was saying, all right, these visions are authoritative for the people who have them, but not necessarily for the rest of us. But we were saying how one function that they do have is that they show us that there's more than one way of looking at the world. That rationalism is not the only game in town. But they can't go so far as to prove the validity or the invalidity of the existence of spiritual experience. And so we're not bound to listen to their message or obey their commandments in the same way that those who have the visions are. Next, we're going to be looking at the article by Sigmund Freud, the so-called father of psychoanalysis, and he's going to be arguing that there is no justification for inferring objective reality from subjective experience. This is from his book, The Future of an Illusion, from 1927. And here in this book, he talks about the conflict of humanity versus nature, of civilization versus barbarism. Here you have this like humanity versus nature conflict going on from his point of view throughout the history of civilization, and human beings have used civilization to try and gain control over these dramatic natural forces like the wind and the rain and the sun and the hurricane and the earthquake. And we live as small beings in a very dangerous world, and it's really easy to feel like we're all on our own at the whim of these huge natural forces, and we want something to comfort us. We want something to let us know that we're not all alone up here, that there's somebody out there looking out for us, because it makes us feel better. And how we get there is this way. First of all, Freud says, we start with the humanization of nature. We commit what he's called an anthropomorphism. In other words, we give human form to something that doesn't have human form. Something like a thunderstorm, or an earthquake, or a lightning strike. Something that's not human, but rather than viewing it as an impersonal, unconscious force, then if we can somehow understand these forces of nature as being controlled by beings who somehow think like us, that something that can be reasoned with, then it doesn't seem so remote and scary. And so we want to humanize it, and to say, well, if we can appease the thunder god, then maybe there won't be a flood that will overwhelm our crops. Maybe there won't be lightning strikes that burn down our village. So in order to make ourselves feel better, we're going to say, well, maybe behind the thunderstorm there's some kind of deity, and if I can participate in a ritual or make some kind of sacrifice to this deity, then the deity of the thundercloud will be my friend and won't burn down my village. So these forces of nature, they're scary, but human beings start to think, well, maybe we can reason with them. Maybe we can make it less scary. Quickly attached to this is the idea of what Freud calls the infantile prototype. In the infantile prototype, we are comparing these these natural forces to other elements that we are familiar with. So not only are we humanizing them, but we're humanizing them in a particular way. So just like the thunderstorm and the rain can be dangerous, we also realize that we need the rain, otherwise our crops won't grow. So we're scared of these powers, but at the same time we need them. And Freud says, well, what other things are there in the world that we're scared of but we need? And Freud's answer is parents. We have fear for our parents, but we need them. They can be a sort of fearsome presence in our lives, but we need them. And so Freud says not only are we humanizing, not only are we anthropomorphizing these forces of nature in order to make ourselves feel better, we're relating them to our parents. So we fear them, but we need them. And these similar feelings of helplessness and dependency lead us to project this parental image onto nature. So that when bad things happen, when the lightning bolt strikes and when the river floods and our village is wiped out, well, these bad things happen for a reason, and it means that this parent is looking out for us. That these forces are not random forces that are out of control. It's not just a thunderstorm that has no reason. It makes us feel better to think that, well, maybe there's some sort of consciousness behind it that's controlling everything. And some cultures have expressed that in terms of multiple consciousnesses. And some would say there is only one consciousness. There is one God that controls everything. And it's a way, Freud says, this is a way that people express their desire for someone to look out for them. And to make ourselves feel better, we create this parental image that we project onto the universe, that it's this sky daddy who's sort of looking out for us. And Freud says this is where our concept of God comes from. Freud has a particular term for constructing a belief in this way, and he calls it an illusion. Now, we usually use the word illusion in a particular way to indicate something that is an error. But Freud is careful to distinguish that. He says just because we have a belief that's an illusion does not necessarily mean it's an error. And so, for example, he points to Columbus's discovery of the American continent, saying, okay, Columbus, he had projected his desire to discover a trade route to India onto his discovery of this new continent, probably Haiti, where he landed. And this was an illusion. He had not actually discovered India. He called folks Indians, but that was a projection of his desire, because this is what he thought he was going for. As it turns out, he had discovered something. So he wasn't totally in error, but he was operating under an illusion. In the same way, you can look at Aristotle, and we can see an example of something that is an error, but is not an illusion. So the example that Freud gives is Aristotle conducted these experiments thinking that vermin developed out of dung. And so he would put some dung in a box and leave it alone for a few days and come back and check it, and there would be maggots and other sorts of critters growing on the dung. And so Aristotle's conclusion was that, well, the dung must somehow produce vermin. This is where vermin come from. And he was in error. As it turns out, vermin and maggots and things are just attracted to that sort of thing for food because they think it's yummy. But it wasn't an illusion. Aristotle was using his rational faculties to the best of his ability. He was mistaken, but he was not operating under an illusion. An illusion, according to Freud's definition, is something that we believe to be true because we want it to be true. So we believe something out of a personal need, not out of a rational conviction. And such it is with many of our religious beliefs. He says, you know, they can't be proved or disproved either way. So it could be that these religious beliefs and this projection of this sky daddy, as he talks about, this could be completely true. Such a thing could exist, but he has this to say about it. This is on page 119 in your textbook. And he says, "We shall tell ourselves that it would be very nice if there were a God who created the world and was a benevolent providence, and if there were a moral order in the universe and an afterlife. But it is a very striking fact that all this is exactly as we are bound to wish it to be. And it would be more remarkable still if our wretched, ignorant, and downtrodden ancestors had succeeded in solving all these difficult riddles of the universe." So, obviously a high opinion that Freud holds of indigenous peoples, but that's where Freud comes from in expressing this idea of where religious belief comes from and why it is that people take religious experience and try to project objective reality from that. Freud would say it's an illusion, we're making this up as a way of making ourselves feel better. So thanks for listening. Next, we're going to be diving into the strong justification in an article by C.D. Broad. All right, thanks.